Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of The Suited Shootist. Yes, I have the Notepad of Knowledge out again, and so this time I'm going to be talking about the Green Ops Combatives for Concealed Carry class that I took out in Kerrville, hosted at the Hill Country Combatives facility. So before I jump into that real quick, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate the folks that have. Welcome, love to have you. And aside from that, the Bespoke Solutions Facebook group has a bunch of great activity, especially when it comes to discussing training opportunities and where the next steps are for some people. So definitely go check that out, and I'm sure you'll be impressed by what it has to offer. So let's go ahead and jump into it. First, I want to just mention up front, full disclosure, John Valentine, who was the primary instructor of this, had reached out to me, asked if I wanted to attend the class, and he was gracious enough to basically discount it for me. I did not pay the full tuition, but that being said, it is absolutely a class that I would be happy to pay full ride for. And especially as a ShivWorks graduate, having taken ECQC, a lot of this was refresher material. On the flip side, if you haven't taken ECQC or Edged Weapons Overview yet, this might be a good primer because it's kind of an introduction into some of the physical concepts that are addressed, and especially if you don't have any baseline foundation in any hand-to-hand work, this would be kind of a good way to dip your toe in without the kind of full intimidation factor of the full-blown Thunderdome 2.5-day curriculum. So either way, it's 100% a viable component pre or post the ShivWorks curriculum. If you've seen any of my other AARs, what I like to do on these is talk about what the course is and what the course isn't. So what the course isn't is it's not karate, it's not Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it is not wrestling, it's not Muay Thai, it's not Krav Maga. It is basically it's hybridized MMA it's for a concealed carrier, because once you introduce weapons into the equation, either ones that you have, ones that they have, and or both, that changes some of the math. And so, even at my jiu-jitsu gym, while a lot of the dudes carry, the methodology that's discussed within the sphere of jiu-jitsu is still very much sport jiu-jitsu, not dude has a knife jiu-jitsu. The other thing that this is not is it's not a one and done class. This is not your typical one-day self-defense seminar that you will go to and you are now imbued with the spirit of generations of warriors, and now you can, go out into the world and, walk taller and be unafraid. Now, it is very much a, it's designed with continuing education in mind. And the other thing that it's not is it's not techniques. There are some technical elements that are discussed, but it is much more attribute focused in terms of, it is concept focused. So it's not like a kata of they do this, you do that. So if that's not what it is, if that's what it isn't, let's talk about what it is, because that's starting to dovetail into the idea. It's principles based. It's very conceptual. So the idea being that in a given position, John likes to show you kind of what winning looks like, what the dominant position is, and then back engineer it to, okay, if that's where you want to get to, here's typically where it starts, and here's how you work to that. It's pressure tested because he uses very much the same progression that I was first introduced to at Extreme Close Quarter Concepts with Craig, which is you start out with both sides, low intensity, letting the guy do the move to get the repetitions in, and then slowly start dialing up the intensity and slowly start dialing up the competitive nature of it to the point where by the end, you are trying to prevent the other guy from doing what it is that they're trying to do, and vice versa. The other thing that it is an ego check. So if you have never worked against another human being that is trying to impose their will on you before, you may not have the truest sense of what your abilities actually are. And, I'm certainly not supremely proficient. I am a 2-stripe white belt at this point in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, I'm still very much entry level. There was a fella there who was probably about 6 inches taller than me and, 60, 70 pounds heavier. And, even the basic wrestlings, I couldn't get my arms around the guy. So, body locks and any of that crap, I would try and get this guy pinned up against the wall, and he was able to just yeet me off of him. So, yeah, it's an ego check. You will find out exactly where your shortcomings are. So kind of jumping into the overview, I already mentioned it. John starts every section with what winning looks like, what the dominant position looks like, and then goes from, okay, so there's Z, and here's how you get through the whole alphabet to get there. We started off positionally with just basic pummeling, and the dominant position there, which again, if you're familiar with the ShivWorks curriculum, what you're trying to get is to the underhook and either a bicep or wrist tie on the opposite side. And as I already mentioned, we worked from going consensual and non-competitive, where it's just almost like a flow drill, all the way up increasing it to it being a non-consensual and competitive actual head-to-head, where John likes to say, it's like, well, we want to make sure that we still like each other at the end of this, but go hard enough that it's going to be challenging, that you're making a point. From there, we kind of progressed in terms of limb control, as well as weapon protection and access, both yours and theirs. We talked about, again, the fence, kind of the defensive hand position, and working on striking from the fence. There were a few of them that we had talked about. The one that I really kind of liked the best was a forearm jab, where it's literally you're taking your forearm and you're dropping your weight across their chest, almost in like a seatbelt positioning. So that was the one that I kind of found the most useful, and that flowed with the rest of the methodology and the techniques that I was already familiar with. One thing that was a very relevant and kind of salient point was that, and John mentioned it a couple times, is that just because help ain't coming for you doesn't mean that it ain't coming for them. So there was a lot of focus on making sure that you address and resolve the problem as quickly as you can, because if you are wrapped up with one individual for too long, then you can very easily find yourself on the receiving end of a boot party, or somebody else running up and sticking a knife or a gun in your ribs while they're just to kind of help bail out their buddy. One thing that Cliff of Hill Country called me out on during one of the drills, his exact words were, "Yeah, your timing fucking sucked," and he was right. He's certainly not one to mince words or pull punches, but in the same vein, he's not going to talk to a stranger like that. We have we have a pre-existing relationship, and so he wasn't saying it to be cruel. He was saying it to drive the point home, because he knows what my skill base and knowledge base already are. And what he was talking about was the fact that in one of these exercises, when I went to access my firearm, while I did have my opponent's arm closest to my pistol tied up, I wasn't doing anything to control the other one. And so his point was that I hadn't earned the draw at that point, because while I was able to keep them from fouling my draw, I was doing nothing to prevent them from accessing their own tools and essentially resulting potentially in a tie, which doesn't count. So it was good to kind of have that perspective and the reminder of, effectively, hey dude, you know better. One thing that was interesting about this, and this was my first introduction to it, was the Muay Thai clinch as it pertains to EDC. Because if you're familiar at all with Muay Thai, you see a lot where you've got both hands wrapped around the base of the opponent's, where the skull meets the spine, and that's where you see a lot of knee strikes come from. Well, obviously in a weapons-based environment, having both of your hands around their neck and leaving their hands free, not necessarily the best idea, because humans are tool using animals, and if their tool users are fully available, then that's how you get yourself stabbed or shot. But what John pointed out was, generally speaking, when you've got one person that is holding the grip of a pistol and the other person that is grasping at the muzzle of this pistol and they're wrestling over the gun, that body positioning tends to look quite a bit like the Muay Thai clinch. And so from that perspective, the elbow and knee strikes suddenly become a little bit more relevant, either as it pertains to weapons retention or disarm, depending on which side of the equation you're on. It was the first time I'd been introduced to that particular concept, and I found it useful. So it was an interesting little tidbit. The practical exercise that culminated the whole thing was at Cliff's facility. He's got a couple of shipping containers that are like 42 inches apart. And so the way we started was, if you were the good guy, you were up against the wall of one of these shipping containers with your gun side away from the bad guy. And if you're the bad guy, you're basically straddling this person with your arms. And it starts when the bad guy punches the good guy in the face. And the idea was, it was a fairly structured and scripted layout. So as the good guy, you are trying to gain dominant position to be able to bring your firearm into play and shoot the bad guy. There's not a forced decision being made here. You are going in with, okay, my goal is to shoot this guy. So this was a skills check, not a tactics or real scenario based event. It was a like I said, a skill check. There was not a whole lot of decision making being made. As the bad guy, you're going into this knowing that the other guy is going to be trying to shoot you, and you have a pretty good idea of where that gun's going to be coming from. So you are trying to control that and keep from getting shot. If you can take the guy's gun away, cool, but you're trying to not get shot. And so you trade off. So whoever's the good guy in the first round is the bad guy in the second round, and vice versa. I was relatively pleased. I was okay with how I did. Number one, it was better than my first exposure to ECQC, just in terms of processing and headspace and all that. But I still got shot. Only got shot once, but I still got shot. And I'll show the video of the two different iterations. But when the dude brought his gun out, I managed to get his back, but because I kind of had his pistol arm in an underhook, he still had enough mobility. He was able to float the gun back and pop me in the ribs. And I ran that by a few of my medical buddies, and while the prognosis varied, the consensus was, regardless, that wasn't good. So it may have been survivable if it was for real. It may not have. But really what that does is that just drives the point home that I still got work to do. Because while the dude that I was going up against, to the best of my knowledge, didn't have the same exposure to ECQC, didn't necessarily have the same combatives experience that I did, while I was able to do okay, he still managed to shoot me. That's not a good day. Now, when the roles were reversed, I was able to have okay timing. Again, I don't think that in a full open environment of anybody can do anything, it would have worked as well. But given the fact that we were operating under conditions where I knew that I was the only one bringing a weapon into play, there were certain things I knew I could get away with. So once I had his limb closest to my gun tied up, I was able to bring my pistol into play, and I kept it in tight, in enough of a thumb pectoral index that even though he kind of managed to get around the side of me and I lost my footing to the point where I fell, I was able to fall on my side to where I landed basically with the pistol almost across my chest and get a couple of shots off on him before they called index. So, let's go into it, because I always wrap these up with the 3x3 model that I've shamelessly pirated from the short-barreled Shepherd. And so the top 3 things that were covered in the class: timing. I mean, that's the big one. And I'm going to link to Craig's video on timing, because you might as well hear it directly from the horse's mouth, because he does a far better job of articulating it than I could simply relaying it secondhand. Posture is another big one, and it kind of plays in with timing, but making sure that if you are, it's the jiu-jitsu adage of position before submission. Before you can start actually executing an attack, you need to make sure that you are in a strong and defensible enough position. Otherwise, at that point, it's just kind of a drag race as to who can get to who first. And the third thing that was really a major element of this was the continuing education piece. John starts at the beginning of it saying, this is not an end-all be-all. You are not going to walk out of here and not have to do another look at combatives training in your life. The entire point of how this course is structured was to make it somewhat replicable, so that you can go out and continue to drill these techniques on your own to build that level of proficiency, which I really appreciated. The 3 biggest takeaways were, number 1, again, I really need to be focused on Cliff's definition, or rather Cliff's clarification, and my lack of understanding of the timing decision. Because it's one thing to make sure that they can't screw up me bringing a weapon into play. It is very much another making sure that I have the timing such that the only possibility is me bringing a weapon into play. Those are 2 very different things. And prior to this, my understanding was much more in the camp of the former than the latter. Another big takeaway was the fact that freaking bigger dudes are a problem. I'm 6 foot 235-ish right now, and I don't come across that many dudes that are much bigger than me. There's a couple newer arrivals at the jiu-jitsu gym that I should probably be spending some more time with for exactly the same reason. I'm not used to being the small guy, and I need to get used to working from that deficit. In terms of things that I'm going to do differently, there weren't any huge revelations on this one. It was a lot of refresher. It was a lot of reinforcement of existing information. So, the only thing that I'm not going to be doing differently per se, but I'm going to be continuing to work on, is my cardio and my breath work. That was a recommendation that I got from Cliff when he and I met last year, is that my gassing out is in part due to the fact that I basically am allowing myself or getting myself hyperventilated. So he was kind enough to give me a copy of the book Breathe, and so I'm kind of working through that and trying to improve, because that has been a weak point of mine for a while. But aside from that, continuing with my jiu-jitsu, now that they're doing a little bit of Muay Thai at the gym too, getting a little bit more striking in, and just trying to get a couple of refreshers on that curriculum periodically is something that I recommend for everybody. So, have you taken a combatives class of any kind? Whether it be from Craig or any of the Shivworks crowd, or I know they speak very highly of Redbeard combatives as well. John at Green Ops, Cliff at Hill Country. Who have you taken combatives work from? I'd be interested to hear that. Let me know. And aside from that, If you have any comments on this, you have any questions about the class, put them down in the comments. I will do my best to answer them. If you're getting use out of the channel, I would very much appreciate if you supported us via Patreon. I've got some awesome patrons. Thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate the support. And aside from that, hope everybody has a great week. Stay dangerous and stay sharp.